The first time I heard that on the Nintendo Entertainment System as a younger fellow playing this for the first time, I thought, hey, that was a nice touch, and it was that little something to get you excited for the game ahead. Unfortunately, Ghostbusters on NES was hardly worth getting excited over, but this game has been driven through the ground harder than that one remake most people want to forget. Even I gave this the business about a decade ago, and that's as far as I want to go here. But Ghostbusters wasn't an original concept on NES, but rather it was a game that originally saw release on home computers back in 1984, the brainchild of one David Crane, creator of many fine classics from back in the day. And in its original incarnation, this game had its share of fans. And then there were Ernie Hudson's kids who thought the game sucked. Maybe because he wasn't in it, but then again, given how the NES version that came along later is probably the most remembered version, I'd say old Winston Zeddemore dodged a bullet there because there was no steady paycheck involved in that debacle. But here we are, Ghostbusters on Atari 8-bit. Also available on Commodore 64 and other computer things. There was even an Atari 2600 version if you could fathom that. And, well, this is the game we're playing today, and after sampling a bit of it, you know what, the NES version sucks, but the concept is rather sound, at least on paper. If you want a slightly more successful console port, the Sega Master System version would also qualify, perhaps being the most faithful to the computer versions while also adding its own annoying stairway segment among other things. Anyway, the general premise is that you are starting off a brand new Ghostbusters franchise, and as such, you start off by typing in your name and if you have one, an account number. If not, the bank will loan you $10,000 to start off, upon which you'll purchase equipment, including vehicles and things of that nature. Be mindful of what you buy because you're stuck with this stuff for the rest of the current game. Once you've acquired your stash, it's off to the map screen, where you control your little Ghostbusters logo thing around to find ghost infestations via glowing building blocks and deal with them, while occasionally making stops at headquarters to empty your traps and recharge your backpacks. As you're moving along, a series of dots will appear to keep track of your movement. Ghosts will appear and make their way towards the Zool building in the center of the screen, and touching them will stop them in their tracks. Once you enter a building, the game switches to a driving segment, where you'll control your car through a rather mundane sequence, occasionally looking out for any ghosts to suck in with your ghost vacuum if you've purchased one, and remove them from the board. You don't get anything monetarily for sucking ghosts, but it's one less ghost to reach Zool, which slows down the building of PK energy that, once it hits 10,000, unless you made more money than what you started with, the game ends. The driving segment lasts until you reach your destination, and the amount of time it takes to reach said destination depends on how much you moved around on the main map. To put it simply, the more dots you leave on the map, the longer the drive. Upon reaching your destination, if a Slimer is abroad, you'll begin positioning your trap and 2 Ghostbusters, and from there you can try and nab them with your streams and traps. The idea is to position the streams in a way as to limit the Slimer's movement and grab it with your trap. If the trap catches the Slimer, you get some money, but if it misses, it'll escape, but not before sliming one of your busters, and if 2 of your busters are slimed, you'll need to return to headquarters to clean up. Crossing streams, obviously, is also ill-advised, for it'll short out your backpacks and also necessitate a return to HQ to recharge. And of course, if all your traps are full, it's another return trip to HQ, which is the only place you could go here on the map. There's no shop to buy new equipment, and also there's no gas station because there's no fuel to keep track of during the driving segments. So you're basically doing this balancing act of finding ghosts to bust and making return trips to HQ. Later on, you'll encounter marshmallow warnings, which will signify the appearance of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man to crush a building. Crushed buildings means you lose money, but if you have ghost bait on hand, you could use it to divert ghosts to your location and earn some pocket change. The idea is that you want to build up enough funds so that by the time the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper reach the Zool building, you'll be able to enter said Zool building, where you have to sneak in 2 Ghostbusters past the bouncing Marshmallow Man. Manage that and the game is beaten. There's no stairway sequence, no final battle thing. You get a cutscene, a $5,000 reward from the city, which is more than what they got in the movies, and also, should you finish the game with more money than what you started with, an extended line of credit where you can start a new game with more money than you did before, which does add some replay value to the game because you can buy the more expensive equipment. Unless you're using one of those account numbers that gives you a shitload of money from the start, because sure, why not? So, I wouldn't blame anyone for not giving this Ghostbusters game a fair shake because they just want to bust some ghosts and stuff. Hell, the idea of a lightweight business simulator based on an outlandish occupation was the furthest thing from my mind, as far as enjoyable Ghostbusters gaming fare was concerned. And mind you, even here in its original format, the action portions of the game aren't necessarily all that great. The driving segments has you moving your car left and right and pressing the button to suck up any passing ghosts within proximity into your ghost vacuum. There's not much to it, it's not terribly exciting, and since there's no fuel shortage to worry about, there's no real sense of urgency, it's just a means to an end. And as far as the actual ghost busting segments are concerned, yeah, so you position one buster on the left, one on the right, activate your backpacks, and the idea is to trap the ghosts with your beams, with your only control being to move each buster closer to the center, with left controlling one buster and right controlling the other. And then you press the button to activate the trap and hope it naps the Slimer. You can't back off, you can't control the angle of your streams, the streams themselves are more like walls to enclose the Slimer in place, the Slimer seems more than happy to just move back and forth without consequence, and honestly the somewhat stringent limits imposed on you throughout the game, not being able to upgrade your equipment, limited control over your busters, not being able to hire more help for your business. I mean, why settle for one Winston when you could get more, especially if you have the funds to do so? The game letting you start a new game with a previous higher balance does add some replay value since you could get the higher end equipment, but you still gotta make that money back and then some, which makes things a tad more difficult than initially thought. I hate to say it, but as much of a misfire as the NES version was, at least it was a little more flexible in what you could actually do. And while going from that to this was an eye-opener in how mucked up that port was, it also highlights how limited this version is. I feel like you should be able to do more, but you can't, and that's what hinders my enjoyment of Ghostbusters more than it probably should. At the same time, however, I can't help but admire the temerity of taking a popular film of the time and rather than go the obvious route and do a straight action game, Ghostbusters goes straight for the core of the film. After all, set aside all the supernatural and paranormal stuff, and it's basically three guys starting up a business and trying to make some money to pay the bills. Well, guess what this game is about? Starting up a new business and trying to make some money. The whole world-saving thing is just a bonus on top of that. The individual pieces of this venture might be a bit lacking, and honestly some aspects could use a bit more fleshing out, but the process was somewhat engaging, at least for the short term. I can almost see the appeal in this idea, and I wouldn't mind a more fleshed out take than what's on hand here. Ghostbusters sports some okay-ish graphics. The map of the city looks fairly decent with street names to boot. The driving bits with the giant cars is perhaps a bit much, but it gets the point across. The scenery is nice for the side view bits. Ghostbusters are tinny stick figures, but you can at least make out the Slimer, which is nice. Not much to say here graphically, it gets the job done. So you only have one music track in the game, and that's the now iconic Ghostbusters theme with its iconic lyrics playing out in iconic text form in an iconic bouncing ball that's so iconic it brings my icons to an icon. Is that iconic enough for you? Can we use some other word, please? I feel iconic has lost all meaning faster than epic did. Okay, so yes, it's a fine enough rendition of the Ghostbusters theme, but that's all you hear as far as music goes, and it gets a bit grating after a while. The minute number of sound effects that pop up every so often, when something happens, they exist. That's all I'll say. On the bright side, the opening vocal's pretty cool. But that's about it, really. Overall, Ghostbusters and Atari 8-bit left me conflicted. On the one hand, there's a certain appeal and a sort of business simulator approach to the Ghostbusters idea that I actually do like to a certain extent, and present it in a format that isn't completely borked. I could certainly understand how this could be a fondly remembered title in most childhoods. On the other hand, however, and maybe this is me just being spoiled by later console ports that added more bits than what these versions initially had, but I feel like this needed more fleshing out. Like, there's a base of a good idea here that perhaps doesn't go far enough. What's here feels more like a sampler of a potentially great game than a whole game onto itself. And again, for some people, this take on a Ghostbusters video game might not appeal to everyone even if it was done right, and I totally get that. And if all you want out of a Ghostbusters game is something more straightforward, then this is not going to be your first choice, and that's okay. There's plenty of other titles that fit that need just fine. But if you're pining for something different and you don't mind something more strategically minded, for lack of a better term, in your ghostbusting endeavors, this take on Ghostbusters might be worth your while. Hell, I might as well fire up the Master System version and give that another go one of these days. Or maybe I'll just go back to Demon Attack. That'll work too.